The earth-shattering idea of getting so much for so little may become commonplace. And when that happens, perhaps we'll look back and say it all started here. Introducing the all-new 2006 Azera. It's a Hyundai like you've never seen before.
So, everybody knows that Hyundai and Kia have been on the upswing for probably the last 20 years. And they have a portfolio of things. People love them some Hyundais and Kias. Now, y'all know I'm the ops. Y'all know I like Honda. But the thing is that Hyundai has always tried. And I feel like there's a special place for me to think about car companies that, in retrospect, have always tried. One car that I didn't quite understand was the Hyundai Azera. And I did a video about the XG350 probably some time ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. But it was the first time before Genesis there was a Genesis. But what I didn't really realize was the successor of that was the Azera. Now, everywhere else in the world, this is the Hyundai Grandeur, and it is a front-wheel drive, big premium sedan. And Hyundai has really tried to do everything they can to capture the attention of the American market. But the Azera, when it was released in 2006, sounded like a good idea. And looking on my paperwork, I think that it made a good idea, but back in 1996. And in today's video, I'll be talking about that. What's up, guys? My name is Chris, and welcome to The Breakdown, where we talk about everything cars, news, and reviews. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, as always, welcome back. So, like I said before, Hyundai has really been trying to capture us, and Hyundai and Kia are known for technology. That's probably their bread and butter. Every automaker has their own specialization. And one of the things that was really hot in the early 2000s was big sedans. Now, for those of you who don't know, especially me who was watching rap videos, you know, the S-Class 7 Series, that was what you aspired for. But when you had you a little government job, or you had you a little, you know, little 1-2, and you had enough money, you got you a premium sedan. But during that time, 2006 was also a very interesting place because that's where the car market was beginning to change and sedans were beginning to shrink in category. And I got to thinking, being that the Azera debuted in 2006, maybe it would have lasted longer had it been 10 years earlier. So in today's video, we'll be talking about the Hyundai Azera, not only about a few of the things that made it interesting, but why I believe that it would have been a better idea to have it just a little bit earlier, and why Hyundai waited just a little too late. If that's something of interest to you, stick around and stay tuned, because you're now watching The Breakdown. Okay, so if you are in the market for a vehicle and you need help buying it, of course, I have to keep repeating this because that's how advertisements work. If you're in the market for a car and you need help navigating the process, click on the link in the description below and get started with Brace Spark today. So with that being said, I think that Hyundai is going to be a little interesting. I'm not going to get too knee deep into the data. I think I've proven myself enough to where if I have to pull that out, I will, but there will be some data points. So the point that I made earlier is that the Hyundai Azera, when it first came out in 2006, it's its best year, and it sold roughly about 26,000 units. And the reason why that's important is because the large premium segment during that time was a big deal, because most people were shooting for the E-Class, they were shooting for 5 Series, and if you wanted something a little more reliable in the mass market sector, you got a big body Buick / Impala / Taurus / whatever, which of course at that time it was the 500, and I think I'm going to do a video about that travesty, but I digress. The thing is that Hyundai during that time were also trying to re-enter the market. Now, the interesting thing about the Azera, like I said, it sold everywhere else as a Grandeur, and it actually started out as a Mitsubishi or rebadged Mitsubishi, and eventually changed over to the XG350. Now, the XG350 is Hyundai's first swing here in the States, not everywhere else, at trying to capture premium large sedans. And it didn't do that well because people looked at it as a knockoff. And Hyundai went back to the drawing board and brought to the States around 2005 the Hyundai Azera. Now, the Hyundai Azera was supposed to be the Avalon equivalent. Now, I'm going to talk about a few other competitors at some point or another, but I want you to keep in mind that during this time, front-wheel drive V6 with leather and Bluetooth. I'm sorry, not even Bluetooth, because that's too far advanced for the rest of the kids. No. You had to have an aux jack. The 3.3 liter V6 had at least 250 horsepower. I don't exactly remember the metrics. I have to go back and check them. But it was a front-wheel drive V6 sedan, and that was one of the selling points, was that it was bigger than a Sonata. It was the flagship at the time because the Genesis hadn't come out. Now, the XG350, it did look like a knockoff. I'm not gonna hold you. The Kia Amante was even worse. But one thing that I can say is that it was a lot of premium appointments, a lot of wood grain, a lot of supple leather, and it did ride like a couch a little bit, and it was smooth for a 3.3 liter. Now, it only had 2 generations. So the first generation was the one that you all probably remember, and if I'm being honest, they always look beat up. I don't know what people do to these Azeras, but they always look beat up. Now, by comparison, the Azera didn't fare anywhere near as well as the Sonata, because the Sonata was the midsize sedan. Of course, people like the Accord, the Camry, they always have an association to brand and the model, and it's a bit of identity. And the target market for the Azera was not for the young folks. If you wanted something for the young folks, you got a Sonata, you got an Accent, you got a Spectra. Y'all not like talking about the Spectra. But you didn't get an Azera, and you didn't get a Cadenza. So the Azera had a lot of the premium features you expected out of a Lexus, out of a Buick. The idea was that if you got an Azera, you were trying to be more value conscious. It was an intelligent decision for a lot of people. But one thing it didn't have was brand cachet. Now, this was 2006, and it was his best year. It just went off a fucking cliff after that year, and partly because of some quality control issues. And this really was the first time that people were actually giving Hyundai a chance. Like, I want to say next to the Sonata, because they came out roughly around the same year. That was really the first time that people were truly paid attention. And of course, you guys know Peter Schreier came over from Audi and took over and really tried to revamp the brand. The second generation was a little more fluid. It looked a little bit nicer, and it was what we thought about as a more premium vehicle, but it still did stand the test of time, and it will eventually be discontinued. The thing that I want to point out here is that the Hyundai Azera suffered from bad timing, real bad timing. I'm talking about you was real late. And we don't talk about how models are not really given a chance depending on where the market is. Now, considering that for the last 15 to 20 years, the Ford Taurus, the Chevy Lumina, the Chrysler Concorde, the big three, the Toyota Avalon had just came out, Nissan Maxima, and of course the big wig in the room, Buick, they were great at creating front-wheel drive lanyards, right? And the thing that really matters in this moment is that the Americans had already mastered that segment, and that was partly because there was a lot of prosperity in the 90s. There was a lot of monies going around, right? And as I talk about affordability, because I've also talked about that in another video, you know, I think these car companies forget the affordability component when they release a new model. And that's not to say there's no research done, because these car companies have all kinds of consultations, all kinds of market research and data to support their decisions. But there is something about reading the room. Looking back at the numbers, because I happened to take a look at them, the numbers were crazy for what they were trying to get. And the Ford Taurus had easily 300,000. The Maxima was selling about 128,000 back in 1996. The Chevy Lumina easily sold 224,000 units. And Avalon had just came on the scene around 95, and it was supposed to be the bigger Camry, and it had sold 73,000, and it only got better from that. And the Avalon has never really been a big seller. I think the most it ever sold was like 96,000 in 1 year, and they still sell it today. But all of those names I just named, none of them exist today, and that's the point that I'm making. So those were almost 30 years ago, if not 30 years ago. And I think that's an important distinction of how the car market has changed. But the Azera dropped in 2006, right before the recession. Very bad idea. And it would have been a great idea in the early 90s, because a lot of the people who could afford a Hyundai would have bought one if it had the same specs as those cars that I mentioned. Now, there also is a catch-22, because Hyundai had been on the market probably 10 years by 1996, because they came out with the Pony Excel in 1986, and people still didn't trust it. And the other thing to remember is that the Asian crisis of 1997 also happened, and so a lot of car companies had to reconsolidate, and that's also when Hyundai and Kia merged together as a unit. But I say all that to say, as a model, the Azera fit all of the qualities of what you would have expected your mother, your dad, or your uncle to have picked up in the late 90s, not the early 2000s. And I believe that's honestly why it didn't last as long as it did. And it was a great idea, all things considered, but the timing could not have been worse. And unfortunately, in today's market, that is now the Genesis. And the Genesis honestly is a much more sufficient product, being that it's rear wheel drive and it's got a twin turbo. And you know, I'm trying to compare apples to apples, and I know they're not exactly the same being front wheel drive, but I will say that the G70 and even the G80 and the G90 especially, because it's what the Azera would have been considered to be, they're not doing that well either. So I think that Hyundai didn't really account for the time period that they released that vehicle, because honestly, post recession, it just went down a cliff and it ain't been right since. But I say all that to say is that the Azera, while a very nice vehicle, it probably would have made sense to have it 10 years earlier, and that I'm just gonna stand on. But you guys let me know what you think, and let me know if you even remember the Azera, and if you think that it was just a Sonata that should have not been, or if you think that there was a lot more potential and Hyundai should have just try to time it just a little bit better. If you stuck this far around to the video, I really appreciate it. I know I can be long-winded. If you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to buy me a coffee. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.